Amen. At this time, I'm going to invite our treasurer, Gary French, and Amy Rowe, the Reverend Amy Rowe from the Finance Committee. If you will both just come up, and Gary's going to present the budget. I'm not sure you're on, Gary. Yeah, you're on now.
It's that way. Put it on.
I could build my ear out.
Let me see your pack.
I'm doing exactly what it's on.
I think you're good.
There you go. You're on now. Talk.
Am I on? You can hear me?
Yeah. Just sit that in your pocket.
All right. Technological glitches. Good afternoon. I'm going to make this as quick as I can, but this is a somewhat unusual year, so I'm not going to go right into the budget. You have a copy of the proposed budget in your packet. You can get that out at some point. But I want to go over a couple of things with you first. Through October of this month, just through October 31st, last month, we are running a budget deficit of $95,454. And November is a heavy expense month because of the cost of this Synod. So I expect that to even go up a little by the end of the year, perhaps as much as 120,000. I hope not that much, but it could be. Given the cost of the Synod and everything, we'll have to cover that deficit with our reserves. We started out the year with $329,000 in reserves, and if it were, say, 120,000 deficit at the end of the year, the reserves are plentiful enough to cover that. But we would likely need to replenish reserves somehow over time as well. Accountants, economists say about 3 months of your operating expenses is sort of the rule of thumb for the amount of reserves. Well, for us, that would be $440,000 in reserves. And we're, especially after financing this year's deficit, we'll be nowhere near that. So in the future, we'll have the challenge of trying to replenish the reserves as well. And it will be a challenge because the current level of contributions to the diocese is not likely to change a whole lot from the churches. The diocese's commitment to church planning that we heard about earlier today is not going to go down. If anything, it's going to go up. We will need to provide more from the diocese for church planning because a number of sources of funds that have been used in the last few years. If you remember Tuck's table from earlier this morning, if you look down at the bottom, it shows how much is remaining in the various funds and sources of money for church planning, and only 32,000, well, almost 33,000 maybe, is remaining from all of those sources. So the earlier sources, which were like the Vision for 50 Fund, which was a multi-year effort of raising money for church planning, has largely been depleted now by church planning expenses, not just this year, but in the last year or two before that. Well, that's how we covered more than the $250,000 that's in the operating budget each year for church planning. They spent what last year, $367,000. So where'd all that other money came from? Well, it came from these other outside sources, outside the operating budget, and now those are largely dissipated. So it's going to be a challenge going forward to meet all of our regular operating expenses plus our commitments to church planning. But the Lord will provide in some way, so we shouldn't worry about it too much. We just don't know what the way He has in mind yet. So, but we know He will. If we look at the new ask, this is the first 2024 is the first year that we ever increased the percentage of operating income that we were asking the churches to contribute to the diocese. And it went from 4.1%, which it had been since the inception of the diocese, to 5.1% for the first time. And this year, 23 of the 39 congregations in the diocese are giving at 5.1%. Another third, or 12 churches, or congregations, are giving at 4.1%. And there's four churches that are giving somewhere between 4.2 and 4.9. And I think it's because they want to give 5.1, but they're just not able to right now, given their financial circumstances, but they're moving in that direction. But it's also true that if every church in 2024 had been at 5.1 and given that much, we would still have a deficit this year. Just smaller than 120,000, but considerably smaller than 120,000, but we'd still have a deficit. So the 5.1 ask is not the solution to everything, but we have no intention this year, or probably even in a few years, of asking for more than 5.1. So this year's budget will be a little different for that reason. So if you'll pull out from your packet a spreadsheet that kind of looks like this, that contains the budget numbers. What you'll see, if you look at total operating income for 2025, is $1,762,000 or thereabout. That's the largest budget we've ever had, and it's large in part because of the success we're having in church planning. We've been planning more churches per year the last couple of years than we ever had in our history before, and that's costly, but very worthwhile. And so that figure reflects that. Now, there's a couple of things besides that income number that I want to point out. If you look at line 4, called designated income, there's an item of $300,000. That's what we would call a faith component. We know we're not going to get anywhere near 1.7 million from the churches at 5.1%, or a little lower than that. But we don't want to diminish church planning. So we put that faith component. What's that mean? We're going to raise that money some other way than from the ask from the churches. And so that's what we intend to do. And that resulted from the prayer and fasting that the finance committee did in the preparation of this budget. That's how we reached that position. One or two other things I'd like to point out is down toward the bottom of the page on line 38, the clergy and spouse retreat, you'll see only $3,778, which is $43,000 or so less than it was budgeted for last year. That's just one way we're trying to reduce expenditures. We're not planning to not have a clergy and spouse retreat. We have it every other year, not every year. And it wouldn't be happening in 225 anyway. It'll be 2026 before we have the next one. So we hope by then we can raise enough money from all sources to pay for the clergy and spouse retreat in one way or another. But we're not including what we would normally do would be to estimate what it'll cost and put half of it in the first year budget and half in the second year budget when the next retreat would occur. And so we're hoping to make up for what we're not doing this year on that line item by doubling it next year, but next year, we'll see, okay? Then one other thing I want to point out in here, if you look at, where is it? Here it is, line 52 on the second page, financial services. This is in professional services category. And you'll see that the budget in 2024 was $10,800, and for 25 we're budgeting $80,452. The reason for that is that our longtime bookkeeper retired, and so we had to find another way to handle that. And what we did is we went with a firm called Auxilio, but they're doing a lot more for us than just simple bookkeeping. They're doing all our accounts payable or handling that for us. They're doing all the financial reporting, like producing documents like this budget document, and they're doing some work with human resource issues. Next year they'll be processing contribution management and other things that they do. For instance, if a church plant doesn't have a sending church providing bookkeeping for them, then Auxilio will do that for that church plant. So right now there's only, I think, one plant that is having that need, but we're going to plant several other churches in 2025, and they may need that service as well. And so the budget at this size does, with the $300,000 faith component, it balances. Otherwise, it wouldn't. So we're going to be the staff at the diocesan level will be working hard to raise that extra money. And after we're finished here, the bishop's going to say something about that and other things about the budget. But for now, that's what I have to say. And we'll have a Q&A if there are any Qs. And you want to come now?
Do we have any questions for Gary? Or for Amy? There's one in the back over here, Tim.
Wait, I'm coming to you. I'll hold it until you chat.
Forgive me if this was covered in the pre-call. I missed part of it. In the 2024 general budget, as Tuck had presented, $250,000, but in the general fund line item for 2024, I see a number in the 70,000 category, the category of 70000 of 195,444. I'm just wondering, where are these supposed to be consistent, or am I just missing something in my reading? Thank you.
Not here? I'm off again. The changeover to Auxilio makes a different format, and they're not really consistent. But it does recognize that of the faith component, the $300,000 is for church planning. That's why we need it. And so the $250,000 of church planning that we always have had in the budget this year and the year before, I think, is now not on any particular line item. but we know that the 374,000 in total, including 74,000 that is from operating income of the diocese, is enough to meet what we expect to spend on church planning next year. I don't know if that answers your question or not. But any others? Yes.
Why are we not?
So just tell us your name and where you're from.
Rick B.A., Mount Vernon, Virginia.
Thanks, Rick.
I just came from the military. The military, we were told 10%. We tied 10% to our diocese. Why are we not planning to move up if money is the issue? That's my question. Do you understand my question? Why is it 5.1 and only 5.1 next year and the year after next, not to expect more? We trust you. We love you. That's my question.
Okay. Well, I guess I'd have to say tradition. We've always been 4.1% until this year. And last year we increased that to 5.1% this year. We got considerable pushback on that from some churches. And so we're not eager to increase it again. But there's also a sense, I think, that comes out of the experience of a number of churches with the old Virginia Diocese of the Episcopal Church, and they had us up, I think, to 17% one time. And there was an experience of the legacy churches, if you will, the ones that were Episcopal churches and left the Episcopal Church, which is a number of the largest churches in the diocese, that sort of anti-diocese, I guess, and so for good reason in the Episcopal Church. And so it's kind of, the thought was we should operate it as lean as possible at the diocesan level, and so we're not eager to increase that ask anymore, especially if we can live without it. That's the best answer I can give you. Mm-hmm.
I'll hold it.
I'll talk. Maybe I shouldn't talk then. Can I hold it really, please? Thank you. So, thank you for your answer, and thank you so much for your work and so supportive of the diocese. I want to say, first of all, my name is David Drake from Church of the Resurrection in Baltimore. 100% support of the diocese, 100%. As the diocese was forming, the vision and mission that was repeated year after year was that the local church is the vehicle for mission in the diocese. Mm-hmm. And so what we did with our budget was, great, we're going to give 10% to mission right off the top. And we're going to give 4.1, which was the ask. So we're giving 14.1. I don't say that to pat our shoulders, but to say all about the diocese, all about mission. So the change that we're all talking about is now we're going to have more mission coming to the diocese, which is great. We love Bishop Chris. If that's his mission, that more mission now will be coming to the diocese, great. But it's going to take some of us to shift some of those monies. So I just want to say the reason I'm reacting a little strongly is it's not that we're all against the diocese. I think from everything I'm hearing from my contacts and my friends, we love Bishop Chris. We love the diocese. But let's just acknowledge there's been a shift in the vision of the diocese. All 100% forward it. Chris, you have my 100% support. We'll do whatever we want for you, but that is a huge fundamental shift from the churches are the main vehicle of the diocese. They're going to be the ones giving to church planning and whatnot, and then putting that into the budget and having the diocese be the fuel for mission. So again, 100% support of the diocese, but I want to recreate that vision of saying, we're just in the process of then saying, okay, we've got to start taking money from our own missions to increase to our diocese, which we're going to be willing to do, but that's not, we're anti-diocese. And so I want to say at least we're
that
not
was-
anti-diocese.
That was probably a poor choice of words on my part. I apologize. I didn't mean to say that anybody was really anti-diocese.
I think we've got
We're all
unprecedented
part
support.
of a hierarchical church, so we can't be
Yeah.
anti-diocese.
So I think, again, the thing I wanted to say is there's a shift. Bishop Chris, we're supportive of you, but that's a huge shift that all of us rectors are starting to say, okay, now a year and a half in, we recognize the shift. We're now coming on board with it, and I think you're doing a good job of getting us on board with it, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if I might just speak into that just for a minute, the need to go up was there before I became the bishop. This trajectory this diocese has been on before I was the bishop. So the move to 5.1 last year was not actually my saying, hey, we're going to shift everything. It was, hey, we don't have enough money to do what we're already doing that I came into. So I just want to orient us along those lines.
And we have had a canon for church planning at the diocesan level for at least 8 or 9 years, I think. So, and before Tuck was. And so it's not church planning at the diocesan level is not new. Now, Tuck has been very successful at it, so the need for the funds is growing because of that success, but it's not new. Okay.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. I'm going to speak for a minute about the 300. The $300,000 fundraising needed for church planting and related. So again, the preparation of the diocesan budget is one of the standing committee's canonical duties, and they take it very seriously. You select the standing committee. The standing committee is your representative between synods, and so they act in representation of this synod. So the standing committee came to the decision that we would seek to raise these funds after an extended season of prayer. So there was prayer and fasting, intentional seeking of the Lord for direction, and after a lot of conversation. And so if one of the things that is easy to do in the church is to come up with our best ideas and then implement them and ask the Lord to bless them on the back end. You know, which is a way that we often turn to our natural giftedness, and our natural giftedness we need to use. But when we encounter challenges, one of the things as a leader you learn is this is also an opportunity to lead a group of people into watching how do we discern in community what the Lord is saying, and then learn as a community to follow him in what he's doing. So it isn't just that there's a crisis or there's an issue at hand. It's the God of the universe is our shepherd and our guide. What's he inviting us into? And so when this started to emerge, that was the perspective I took as the standing committee was meeting to talk about these things. Well, what the people of God do is we pray and we fast and we seek the Lord. We know what the issue is. We know we've got a funding issue. It's been coming for a while. Lord, what do we do about this? And so the standing committee deliberated about the budget, our need to raise funds. We realize it's more difficult to raise money from donors for ongoing expenses. It's just not as sexy, you know, for lack of a better way of describing it. But it is generally easier to raise funds for specific missional engagement. And so as we were praying and then solidifying, so you pray, you discern, you seek, and then you watch to see what the Lord is blessing or leading toward. As we were solidifying in our sense that the direction that we were being called to go was in the raising of the $300,000, a donor emerged, and I say emerged because we didn't seek somebody, we were seeking the Lord. This donor was unsolicited, who offered a 2-to-1 matching grant up to $150,000 for this church planting initiative. And that means that when we raise $75,000, it becomes $225,000. Yeah, that's worth clapping over. And so I believe very strongly that this is the Lord's provision and direction, that should you choose to ratify this budget, what I want you to say, as I said earlier when I was describing evangelism and relational evangelism that my wife and I we don't just say do it, but we would say we're going to do it. We'll make the first pledge of $5,000, which means that's $15,000 because of what the donor's going to give. And so should you decide that, we'll lead, we'll step in. Now, I'm also going to be the one who's having to raise a lot of the money, and I'm also going to be one who's putting in on the money, because I'm in for the diocese, and I'm in for what the Lord is doing. Because did you hear those people standing up here? Mike Coppola, Mike Seawright, Robert and April, Patrick Cunningham. The work of God is going on. And ours is to see what God's doing and join him in it. And I think part of that is, you're right, the work of mission and planting happens in churches, but there are multiple ways that it has to happen in order for it to occur. And so I've heard from others since the Zoom calls who heard me talk about this the first time, and several have said, yeah, I'm in. And I said, well, you can't be in because the Synod hasn't voted on this. There's no in yet. There might be an in. I hope there's an in, but hang on to your in for just a little while longer, and let's see what comes of it at the Synod. So we haven't accepted anything from anyone, but I know who you are. So if you choose to ratify this budget, wouldn't it be amazing if we could raise much or all of that money here? Oh, wait a minute, Bishop. We didn't know you meant that. But I mean, perhaps that's exactly what God is calling for some of us to be about. Maybe God's stirring and inspiring us to give 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. Some of you probably could drop 25,000. 30 would support a whole plant, and that would be tripled. So this is not the previous Vision for 50 fund. It would be called the Fund for Church Planting, for missions and missional grants that Tuck described this morning. And so, as I've said previously, in many ways, our diocese is very much like a startup, a company in that kind of phase. We're growing, we're in need of cash. And the hope is that over the next few years that this fund for church planting, should we move that direction, can serve as a bridge getting us from where we are. Like even this is a bridge as we're discerning which way to go. Because I'll be honest, being a fundraiser on top of what I'm already called to do, I'm happy to do it, but it is like the longer that goes on, the harder it becomes on an already almost untenable schedule. And so we will have to think strategically, and we'll need the help of people in our diocese who, some of you are fundraisers. You do this for a living. We need your help. The Lord, I think, has provided in the short term, perhaps what we need, but we need others who, you probably do, some of you do this in your sleep and do it really well. And so we need your help if we're going to continue in this direction. And so we're growing in need of cash. And so right now we have more money going out to plants than those plants can bring back in terms of their inflow. We have more outflow going. So as the number of church plants continue to develop, our financial commitment would, right, we have to decide. We may need to slow down. And that may be an option we have to think about. I mean, that could be a realistic option. But the reason why I think it's also helpful for the diocese to be involved is that there are places where God's stirring that don't have relationships with local churches. And so part of what we do is we help make those connections, as well as helping the smaller churches who maybe can't do a whole plant on their own. Like, you can be a part of a plant by the way you engage with the diocese in this way. So it isn't an either or. I think it's a both and that we're dealing with here. Because to be an either or, if it all came to the diocese, it would be top heavy and we would be out of subsidiarity. But I think it's much more, there's more dance to this than there is hard science in terms of the way this has to play and work out. So that's what I want to say to you about that 300 and what I think, if you're in agreement, is a tenable solution for this budget cycle. Are there any questions about that?
Good afternoon. Angie Savino with Restoration. I had one question. Could you talk to us just a little bit about who that donor is and if there's any strings attached to it as well?
Yeah, the donor's asked to be anonymous. That's the string. And it's up to $150,000. Yeah. But if I could tell you, I would, but then the string would be broken. No, you can pledge. Have you ever heard anybody say, no, we won't take money that way? Yeah. Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be in hand, but we're liable to let you make a pledge today if we pass the budget. Yeah. Any other questions or further discussion? There's one more.
I did forget the most important thing. In your packet is this pledge form.
Well, wait a minute. We don't need that yet.
No, this is not for church planning. This
Oh,
is
my
for the-
goodness.
This is for the 5.1.
Oh, well, good gracious. Talk to him about that.
And so be sure and fill this out and send it in as soon as you can, each church. Thank you.
And who would do that, Gary? Would that be their treasurer? Would that be their finance committee?
Or
Their
the
rector?
vestry may have to vote on it.
Yeah.
So,
I just want to be sure they know who it's for.
Right.
Thank you.
There you go, Bishop.
Good afternoon. Alex, Junior Warden at Redeemer Anglican in Richmond. I'm curious, there's a stretch this year to sort of fund the operating budget, but we're also operating off of the reserves being diminished. It seems we're in a vulnerable cash position if we were to experience that again. Mm-hmm. What is the plan to sort of replenish the reserves?
You want to take that one?
I would love to take that one. I mean, part of our plan is prayer and fasting, which we are already doing. Part of it is trusting that these estimates of the church's giving are conservative. These are based on the 2024 income of our congregations, but we have other churches that are missions or have just become congregations who also give to the diocese. So we are hopeful that our projected income from churches is conservative and that the faithful giving of our churches will actually exceed our expectations. We are in a vulnerable cash position, and so part of taking that church planting budget out of the operating budget and making it a designated fund is basically trying to give us sort of a longer on-ramp so that we are not depleting our reserves at quite as fast a rate. That gives us time to kind of grow into a sustainable budget from the support of our churches, but looks to outside cash at kind of a large infusion in the meantime, so that as we are doing operations and the missions of the diocese at the scale we're doing it now, we can kind of grow into sustaining that from amongst ourselves. So kind of a mix of planning and then prayer and trusting God.
Thanks, Amy.
Peter Frank from Epiphany in Chantilly. What's the plan for next year? Or are we to that point yet? I think probably the heart of my question is there a sense that asking for giving outside of the budget for, let's say, specifically church planning is going to be how we're doing things going forward? Or is this a solution for this year and we'll pray about it and see what next year holds? So.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes to both parts of your answer. Right now, this is our 2025 plan, but as we project out, we are giving multi-year, or our desire is to give multi-year gifts to new plants. And so that means that every time a new church is planted, we are anticipating giving them money over the next 3 years. And so that means that in the short term, like the next few years, we do think we will probably need this outside piece of our budget, like outside funding as a part of our budget. So we have not begun our 2026 budget planning, but we're anticipating something in a similar vein. We would love to be surprised and to discover that we don't need it, or that we don't need it at quite the same scale. Because one of the nice things that happens with church plants is we support them as they launch, and then they begin to contribute to the diocese again. And because this is all still kind of new at this scale, we've not yet come into realizing what that feels like as a diocese. So there's a lot that's unknown for us. And so we're both trying to plan and be responsible, and then we'll see. Yeah.
Touch it. Amy or whoever wants to answer. Kevin Marshall from Restoration. Do you have an idea of what percentage ask would be needed to have a balanced budget, including covering church planting, if every church was able to give it whatever that number is?
Do you want to do that or me?
Well, as I said, if we had 5.1 from every church for this year, 2024, we'd still have a deficit. So are you asking how much more it would have to be? Well, we have some rough calculations that suggest if we were at 6 to 6.5%, that might cover things at the levels they are today or in this budget for 2025. Whether that's sufficient for the long term or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I can just comment on that. We did do some calculations, and I think for the 2025 budget, the between 6 and 6.5% is the difference between 6% or 6.1% would get us to like a neutral budget, breaking even. That higher, like around 6.5%, would get us to there, and then also replenish the budget. But I think to David's point, it's a significant change for us as a diocese to go from 4.1 to 5.1, and so we don't intend to ask for 6 to 6.5%, but that is what it would be.
I got a quick question. I'm David from Restoration Arlington. So two things. One is I want to encourage you to not say we're not going to ask for more, because I want to give you some flexibility. You might need to. So I appreciate the gentleman from Mount Vernon who said that. Secondly, as you talk about we need fundraisers or doing things outside the budget, my feeling is that we really appreciate being a diocese, and we want to be connected to each other. We want to be a part of this. And so what I would encourage you, those of you who are rectors and wardens, we know, and now it's really clear to us what the diocese needs. So to what Drake said, we need to metabolize the ask that we've got, which is 5.1%, but we might need to give more. So to go back to my church and say, all right, maybe we need to think about 5.5, 5.75, edging up towards 6. Those are things that we can start talking about with our churches. We don't have to wait for you to mandate it. We can think about it. And that's a way for us to be a part of this without you having to hire an outside fundraiser, do these kinds of asks. I'm thrilled with the stories that you told us today, thrilled with what God's doing through our diocese. And we all know, as part of the diocese, we are the diocese. We know that there are more financial needs that the diocese has. We can talk about that in our local churches and talk about how we can be a part of that. So I know that we will at Restoration. I hope that you guys will as well.
Chris, we have another one over here. Why don't you just come all the way out here? That'll just be the easiest. There you go.
I'm Katie Micklitz. I'm from Church of the Resurrection in Baltimore. And my question is, optimistically, if the full amount is able to be fundraised to get the full match for the $300,000, if there are funds raised beyond that, what would the plan for those be? Would that still be designated to the church planting gifts, or would that go maybe to help cover some of these other needs and deficits elsewhere in the budget?
Yeah, well, so if we raise 75, we get to 225, we still need another 75. Does that? Yeah, so we have to raise beyond the 75. So if we get to the 300, then we'll have to decide what to do. Probably if it's been given for church planting, it's going to go into that fund and go forward. So it wouldn't then, if you make a designated gift to the church planting fund, it's not going to then be used for the diocesan income on that side. So.
That's for the outside funding, which we're telling the outsiders that it's for church planting.
And the outsiders are insiders.
But
just to make sure you're sufficiently confused.
Outside the budget.
Yeah.
Okay. But we still need to replenish reserves. They're getting really low, and so if we have success in raising more money than is needed for church planning, that we would replenish the reserves with any extra. But that would only take a 200,000 or 300,000, and so it wouldn't be if we really get affluent later. It wouldn't require all of it.
Just to be clear on that, we actually would need to keep that designated for church planting.
Right.
So we need both of those things, but it would carry forward to church planting.
She has one more question.
Yes, just confirming that the matching donor commitment is a single year only.
Currently, I think he wants to see how it goes.
Okay.
He wasn't willing to commit.
Okay.
Or she. I see what you're doing. You're working me towards.
Gail and Carrie, Trinity Fellowship, Columbia, Maryland. Does the diocese have a line of credit? Is there a policy about having one or not having one? And what are your thoughts about it?
I can say that we do not have a line of credit. I don't know if we have a policy or I don't know if that's in our bylaws or our canons or anything. I'd have to look. I don't know if either of you know.
We've never had one because we have never used to. We haven't ever borrowed money.
Yeah, so. It would be our strong desire to not come to that.
I heard somebody call the question.
Yes. Second.
Well then, thank you, Gary and Amy. I'm going to ask the Synod now. Yeah. I'm going to now ask the Synod to vote on the budget. Is there any other further discussion? Question's been called. Okay. All in favor of ratifying the budget signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? There we go. Thank you. I will let you two head on back. At this time, we will, oh, wait a minute. I have a note. If the budget passes, distribute pledge cards. You already did that? No, not your pledge cards, my pledge cards. There they are. Can you pass those out? They're going to just send those out, and we would love to invite you, if it's on your heart, to make a pledge. This is not your 5.1. This would just be if you're interested in contributing toward the 300 or towards this matching grant. And we thank you as you consider that. If you already came in here ready in your heart about it, then don't leave with those. But if you're not ready, take them with you and pray, and maybe take a few extras. You might have some friends or people in your church that you know are people for whom this is right in their happy place, and they would love to be a part of that.